Welcome back, everybody.
Suddenly we're so somber because we were talking about trauma.
I know trauma's just never a fun
It's kind
thing
of
to
hard
talk
to
about.
be silly with that.
I was
Yeah.
telling Dana. So I've got a teenager in my life. So it not only gives me plenty of times and opportunities to practice humility, but it also teaches me wonderful. It teaches me new vernacular.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I didn't know that being a spaz or calling someone a spaz is a bad thing today. It's very offensive.
It's terribly offensive. Yeah.
Terribly offensive. I did not know that because when I was growing up, we used that as just someone who was energetic.
Oh, I got called spaz a lot, but it wasn't in a good way.
Okay. Just someone who was just like kind of like all over the place.
Like,
right?
just like this, you're spazzing out. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so I didn't know. And the word came up and my daughter was like, no.
Not
canceled.
Yeah.
Like, no, like, no.
That's what I'm appreciating about a younger generation is they're getting into the nuances of some of these words. And a lot of people would say, oh, they're, cancel culture. And I say, no, this is good. They have awareness of these things. That's a positive thing. Yeah.
Yeah. They're totally, and in that way, they're awakened. They're, okay. So we hit that word, right? Before in our show. But anyway, so it what came up was this label or this adjective of trauma dumping.
Yeah.
So Dana and I was talking to Dana about it.
I've heard the term, and I think the first time I heard the term trauma dumping, I knew immediately what it was as someone who works with clients with complex trauma in lots of different settings, not just one-on-one as a therapist, but like in group work, and I teach how to do groups and those kinds of things. And it's a thing that happens. It's common to happen with folks that have complex trauma because they don't really have a sense of the where and whens and what, when you should talk about something. And trauma is a funny thing that if you start to get into the well of it, sometimes it's hard to just take a sip. Sometimes the whole thing gets drunk, right? So you just like, bleh, and so everything's connected to everything else. And as therapists will sometimes see this where I don't feel like I know the person very well and I don't yet have rapport built. And it's a thing in complex trauma. And I think it's actually somewhat diagnostic that someone will just tell you all this trauma when you just met them. And then but they're telling you these horrific things and they're like smiling or laughing about it. And you're like, oh, there it is. But it really is out of this place of there's so much there. And I don't have the skills to control it sort of when I start to take a drink. And I don't know what is a safe, use the word safe place, safe space to do it, right? There's even like a whole theme on TikTok where the video is something like, I didn't know that this wasn't the place to, it's like people looking at me with horrified faces as I made yet another joke about my trauma, and I thought it was hilarious, and all the neurotypicals are like, what the hell is happening? So it's like, you see it in a different way. But this idea of trauma dumping, you talked about that example where typically you think about if you really share some deep-seated, highly personal, highly hurtful things that have happened to you. These are not things that you would share or should share, really. There's a should at a cocktail party with people you just met. But it happens, right? And why is that? Because you're making yourself vulnerable when you do it. And I looked up a definition of this when we were talking about doing it, and it says, while not a clinical term, trauma dumping is when someone unloads the details of their traumatic experience onto someone without regard for its impact. So to the receiver who isn't equipped to deal with it, or you haven't earned the social points, if you will, like if I know something, I know someone really well, and they're like, can I talk to you about something really serious? something that happened to me, and then you're like, okay. Versus if you're out for coffee and someone, before you know it, they've told you this 10-minute story, vivid details of them being raped by their stepfather or something, and you're just like,
Yeah.
what do I do? How do I do this? So it is a thing, and there is a mechanism and an understanding for why people do it. And then
Yep.
when I Googled it, it did say the next drop down bar was how to deal with it. And it was really just to be honest with the other person and say, this is too much for me, or are you aware that you're telling me these highly personal details and I'm uncomfortable, or something along those lines. But it is
Yeah.
almost like it dovetails on our last episode about info dumping. It is almost to me like an obsessive need to just, barf out the story or get it out.
You know, you like you immediately, or I feel like an immediate empathy for this person, right? Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
idea that all of these awful, horrible things happened to me.
Mm,
And I maybe I haven't had a space or a place in which those things have been acknowledged in a way that I can find healing for myself, right?
yeah, yep.
So here it is. And so okay, there's the how does this make sense, right? What is the
Hmm.
contextual aspects, or what are the contextual aspects of this? And then there's this other piece where that kind of information, which I think is quite precious,
Hmm. Hmm.
should, and I know Dana and I don't use this S word
I
very often,
know. Yeah. Yep.
um, be shared in a safe space that has
Mhm.
been predefined by the strength of a relationship.
Yeah. This is like when we work with trauma, we spend a long time just building trust and doing
I
resource
mean,
installation and making you. The other thing that came to mind when we were talking about that was people can learn to, when I say use it, I don't think they're using it like, oh, I'm going to get out of this thing by saying this. But I think sometimes if people feel trapped in something, and they don't know how to, they feel vulnerable and they're taking the blame for something, they might trauma dump so the other person sort of goes easy on them. That can be like a learned
mm,
response. Like, you should
mm,
feel sorry for me because look, this thing happened. And
mm,
I think that can make the receiver angry. For me, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? I'm mad at you about this other thing. Don't make me feel sorry for you. I think
right.
that's what you can see show up too. And then that's not going to be a good experience for either party in that case, right?
Would you say, Dana, would you go as far to say as that would feel manipulative?
Yes, it could. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. The
Like
receiver can
maybe
feel
not
manipulated.
consciously, it's maybe not a conscious manipulation,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the other receiver might feel a little bamboozled, or like it might feel like
Yes.
they're kind of being manipulated,
Yeah.
which never, I think feels good.
That can happen
But
in couples a lot. I see that happen
yeah.
where the one will say, oh, but I have this thing. And then it almost becomes a bookmark excuse, like, I'm vulnerable, don't hurt me because I have this thing. And then it can sort of feel manipulative after a while. I think that's where the
Yeah.
really bad taste gets left in people's mouth about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thematically, what do we often talk about? We talk about self-awareness, self-knowledge,
Hmm.
and we talk about intentionality and deliberateness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or psychologically, we'd say a locus, right? Like, what is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
locus of control, right? We need to feel a locus or a sense of control over our lives.
Hmm.
As something we also talk about this through efficacy,
Yeah.
right? This idea, though, which is this information is special,
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
right? Like, you don't go sharing special things with anyone and everyone. And you're right. People who come in with no boundaried control
Hmm.
it lets us know something.
Yeah.
And people who come in super, super guarded with
Yeah.
it taking a very, very long time to build rapport. I will say many of my neurodivergents,
Hmm.
we can take up to a year,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Me
even with
too.
my
Yeah.
dazzling personality and knowledge.
They're
Okay.
like, I don't
And
know. Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
that's, and I'm being totally sarcastic, but like, you know, that tells us something as well, right?
Yeah.
And so, but this idea of trauma dumping is just it's an ability, it's maybe an encouragement for you, if you feel hurt and you're just overflowing, and I'm so sorry that this would be an experience for you if this is the
Mm-hmm.
case, that you're overflowing with stories and flashbacks and
Mm-hmm.
vivid memories of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so sorry. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Go to the right place
Yeah.
with that information. So
Because I think
another thing I
it
say,
happens. So I think that's probably what is happening. I'm
yeah,
thinking of, to relate it to neurodivergence. This can be a case where you have all the details of the story, because we'll do that too. Like people say to me, "What is your point? Can you please get to the point?" Because I feel like I have to fill in all the details. Oh yeah, okay. There's that point. It can feel sometimes like, let's say I have the story that uh, what I finally learned out of it was, I can't trust truck drivers with red hats. But I
yeah,
can't go to that synopsis yet because it's still too emotional. So what ends up happening is I tell the story rather than the punchline. So sometimes it becomes, and that's a kind of alexithymia that, like, or if
yeah,
I'm overwhelmed with feeling, I can't just name it. I have to tell the story as
yeah,
a way of naming it. That can be part of it.
yeah,
And so sometimes it can be a flag to say, oh, I need to, like you said, stand back and get that larger newspaper headline for it. That I can tell someone that I've experienced this before. I'm really sorry. When I've been hurt before in friendships, this has happened, and I'm freaking out. That's very different than me telling you this big long story that has a bunch of trauma to it, right? You
yeah,
talk about too it being like this really important information. I remember my therapist telling me, you think of these things as newborn babies, and you
mm-hmm.
don't take a newborn baby to the mall. And that was I had
Mm,
gone to a week-long intensive workshop. I was super excited about all the insights that I had, but they were still really new, and they were mostly the stories and not the
mm,
punchlines. And I
yeah,
wanted to tell everybody about it. She's like, well, first of all, it's going to be out of context. They're not going to really understand that. But she was saying, no, keep that baby close to you. Don't take it to the mall. Keep it away from contagions and all that until it grows up a little bit. And then you can say, I have this thing with men that drive semi trucks that have red hats. Um, that trauma dumping, I think, happens for all those reasons. And the person on the other side of it, I think we're seeing this phrase show up in younger folks. They're no longer like you or I when this would happen, where we'd be sitting and internally saying, what's happening right now? Why is this person telling me all that? And then after they told the story, we go, oh, I'm sorry. And then we'd walk away and like just avoid them. The younger generation is like, boom, I'm there. This is trauma dumping. This is not okay. So they're a little bit more enlightened about that, and
yeah.
then having choices on how to deal with it rather than just like sitting there going, oh, okay, I can't get away from this. What do I do? What do I do? Right? Older generations, that's what we were taught. You better sit there and
I,
listen. You better not say anything.
if you're not watching, Dana's like, oh crap, what do I do? What do I do? Face is so flippin' fantastic. It like deserves to be like beautifully animated because it is
Oh,
so like expressive.
oh my God.
Um, the side, what sucks too for the person who's been traumatized is
Yeah.
that when you go to McDonald's expecting lobster,
Yeah.
you get really disappointed, and the
Yeah.
feedback is that you got, an awful meal full of hydrogenated oils that will kill you in 10 years, kind of thing. Like
Right.
instead of like, right. But if you keep going to McDonald's and expecting lobster,
Hmm.
you feel so disappointed and you feel so awful.
Yeah.
And then it's like, then there's anger and resentment because it's like, no one wants to hear my story. This actually happened to
Yep.
me.
Yep. You're
And
recapitulating the trauma. You're
yes,
making it worse because you're not getting
y-
validated every time you do it. Yeah.
yes. So you cannot go, like, these are the things that need to be validated in a safe space
Yeah. Yeah.
with time and energy
Yep.
to do it. It's
Yeah.
not a fly by night drive by
Mhm. Mhm.
situation And I think, you know, it just, unfortunately, I feel like the traumatized person gets re-traumatized in this
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And not, it's nobody's fault. I'm not saying
Right.
that. I'm
Right.
just saying,
Right.
like, interpersonally,
Yeah. It doesn't go
it's
over well.
not set up. It's, you're not, and I love that newborn baby to the mall, you know,
Hmm.
expecting lobster at McDonald's. Like,
Yeah.
you got
Yeah.
to go to the right place. We do this for cars. We do this for medical reasons. We
Yep.
don't
Yep.
go to the podiatrist when we have allergy
Right.
situations. Like, you know, like, you know, you go to that place for that. And for
Yeah.
trauma, that belongs in a psychological space
Yeah, where it
with a,
can be held and nurtured,
yes,
and then you can integrate the learning from it
yes,
so that then
yes,
you can say, I don't like men
yes,
and semis with red hats, or
right.
you can even decide to not share that. I'm thinking of
Yeah,
a situation I had
yeah.
at work a couple months ago where someone who's going through some hellish stuff with their family was talking about the difficulty with their mom, and internally I was just like, oh, if you only knew. I mean, I was doing that, comparing, like, oh dude, that is nothing. And I wanted to be like, bleh, you want to hear something really bad? And I thought, why do I want to do that? And I'm like, no.
Right.
Oh, okay. I'm wanting to dissipate their experience by knowing that mine was much, much worse. And I'm like, oh, that's not it. And then I didn't say anything. I'm like, that's really hard. But that's also after
Yeah.
years and years and years of working on this stuff, knowing that
Yep.
if I were to barf that out there, it wouldn't go well, wouldn't be received well. Yeah.
Yeah, and that as therapists, we tend to self-disclose when it's actually only helpful for the client.
Yes. Yeah. That's
And
right.
so, you know, it's not a place for therapists for us to get our needs met. It's a
Yeah. This
place
was
for us
a
to
this is
help
a
the
colleague that
person.
I teach with,
Oh, a
but
colleague.
I would
Okay.
never
But
I
you
would
know what
never
I'm
do that with a
saying?
client. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, and you know, we've been on the other side of that where it's like, well, it's always
Mhm.
about that person. You know, it's
Exactly.
always about that
Yes.
person.
Yes. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and so this is a really sensitive thing,
Yeah.
and I'm so sad that there's still traumatic moments for people. And that
Yeah.
unfortunately is I think going to be the case in this big bad
Yeah, but if
world
you
out
if you
there.
recognize yourself, or you have this need to kind of tell people all of
Mhm.
these details about your own
Mhm.
trauma,
Mhm.
know that it's a thing and be gentle with yourself, and then maybe get some therapy for it, or
Yep.
trusted folks, because we don't want you to keep hurting yourself by, flinging yourself against a wall when the wall isn't going to help. It's just going to
It
hurt
it
you.
is it is
Yeah.
a form of self-harm.
Yeah. Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
in
And
a
you have no
really
idea. But you bring up the really good point. I've seen it time and time again where people finally get into therapy with me, and I'm like, tell me about it. And they're like, no, I've told this to 8,000 different people and they always act the same. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but that was not the place to do it. And now is the place to do it. And I'm going to
yep.
hear you. And it just reinstates how much people go to the drive-thru at McDonald's expecting lobster. And it's really
Yep.
sad. It's,
Yep.
it's terrible to see that just being re-insulted versus some compassion. Right.
Right. It
Yeah.
needs to be held properly,
Hmm.
you know, and I would even add
Hmm.
this, if you go to therapy needing to
Hmm.
process and integrate and understand and heal from trauma, make sure
Hmm.
you go to a trauma informed
Yeah,
therapist.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
do
yeah,
not under any circumstances
yeah,
go to a therapist who is not a trauma informed
yeah,
therapist.
yeah.
That
It
that
kind of
that
reminds me of, like,
you know,
reading War and Peace, which I've never read,
oh,
but it's a pretty big book, right? Versus the Cliff Notes. I can remember my teacher saying, "Don't just read the Cliff Notes because you're not going to pass the test. You're not going to know enough about it." And I was like, "Well, you can kind of get by on a test with Cliff Notes, but if you want that other person to know the real details of the whole book,
yeah,
that's for, like, your therapist or your
yeah.
spouse over time and that kind of thing, so you can be seen in all those details." Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and here's a disclaimer. If you're a male who drives a semi and you wear red hats, we don't, that's fictionalized. Okay. We're
Has
not
nothing to
targeting
do with the real
you.
world. Nothing. I totally made it
I
up.
think
Has
I probably have met a man who drives a semi truck who's worn a red hat and it was probably fine. So I'm just saying
Yeah.
we're not isolating men who drive semi trucks with red
Right.
hats.
Right. It was a loose association with no bearing on the real world whatsoever. This is a really good example of a projective, we call them. where
Mhm.
something, the seemingly a random bit that you put
Mhm.
out there has a grounding in something that is bigger inside of you.
Well, Dana, I maybe off camera, I've got some theories on that projection.
Yeah, yeah,
But
especially if it
anyway,
has like big white lettering, probably would give you yeah,
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 that's where I would go with it
yeah,
if I were to support you. Um, anyway, um,
Speaking of trauma, yeah,
so y- get help and support from the right
yeah,
place.
exactly.
Then your true lived experiences do not get diminished.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, that's a Cliff
Woo!
Notes. I got right.
See? Yes, exactly.
See,
That's right. That's how it works.
sometimes it works. My
Yeah.
brain works, not my eyes, but my brain.
Not your That's right.
I'm trying to. I just put on some readers,
Yeah. Does it
Dana.
help?
It helps the up close stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's not helping that one eye with the wonky contact get any better, is it?
And here's the other issue. Here's another problem. I have no bridge on my nose, no bridge because I'm Asian, right? Like, well,
Oh,
maybe
they just
some Asians
slide
have
off.
bridges, but so any type of thing that doesn't have a actual nose pads,
Mhm.
end up sitting on.
See,
Do
these
I?
are
Do I?
we're talking about trauma dumping, but in the vein of that is these
Uh-huh.
struggles that everybody goes through on any given day that are very real and big that you have no idea what
Mm-hmm.
they are. So, like, that's a
Mm-hmm.
thing. I'd never have to deal with that because I have this big hump on my nose. My wife has a very small head, so she always has to get little kid glasses or they look like
Mm-hmm.
clowns, they're
Mm-hmm.
too wide. And yeah,
Yeah.
I never thought about that you would have to get a particular kind of glasses because your
Yeah.
nose can't hold up the other ones. It's a real pain there. Pain
These
in the
are
ass.
the struggle is real on this side of the camera.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
people, the fact that Dana and I have even taped anything today
It's a
is
miracle.
remarkable. I'm just calling it. I'm canceling the rest of my day. I'm
Yeah.
just saying
Yes.
I've done it.
Because you
Even
can't
though meeting
see.
with Dana is easy.
Yeah,
Meeting
but
with
you
Dana is
can't.
easy breezy stuff. Anyway, all
Yeah.
right, everyone.
Go out there
Catch it.
and tell people, but not everybody, about your glasses falling off because your nose can't support them. Tell the right people. We're getting really loose here now.
You know
Right.
who I'll be calling today is my contact specialist optometrist.
You better
That's who I'm
believe
going to be
it.
calling today.
That's right. That's right.
That's what I'm going to do. All right,
You should.
everyone. We will
You need to trauma
catch
dump
you.
onto him.
Oh, he's about to get an earful. Is this? It's not trauma dumping. It's just going to be
Yeah, that's right.
just
An
anyway.
earful.
All right,
There you
everyone.
go.
We will. I'm going to say we'll catch you in the next episode because again, I'm not talking about seeing it all. All right, bye.
Bye.